August 17, 1943. Allied Headquarters, Algiers. The heat lingered even after sunset, pressing against the stone walls where General Dwight D. Eisenhower stood alone with a single sheet of paper in his hands. The war in Sicily had been won. Messina had fallen. The newspapers would soon declare victory. Yet Eisenhower's attention was fixed not on maps or casualty lists, but on a report he could not ignore. Lieutenant General George S. Patton had struck a wounded American soldier. Not once, twice. The details were precise, clinical, damning. On August 3rd, at a field hospital near Nicosia, Patton had berated a young private suffering from what doctors diagnosed as battle exhaustion. He called him a coward. He slapped him across the face. 9 days later, at another hospital in San Stefano, Patton repeated the act, this time striking the soldier with his gloves and threatening him with a pistol. The report traveled upward quietly, but its implications were explosive. Patton was Eisenhower's most aggressive commander, the general who broke stalemates, the man whose tanks moved when others hesitated. He was also volatile, theatrical, and uncontrollable. Eisenhower had tolerated that volatility because it delivered results, but this crossed a line that victory could not excuse. Eisenhower understood the moment instantly. This was not about discipline in a hospital ward. It was about the command itself, about whether an army at war would be ruled by impulse or restraint, about whether authority flowed from results alone or from moral control. He folded the paper carefully. If he protected Patton, he risked the trust of every soldier who believed wounds of the mind mattered as much as wounds of flesh. If he crushed Patton, he risked losing the general most capable of winning the next war. The decision could not be delayed. Outside, the Mediterranean was calm. Inside Allied Command, the most dangerous battle of the campaign was about to begin, one not fought with guns, but with power. To understand why Eisenhower hesitated, even for a moment, one had to understand George Smith Patton. Patton was not merely a general, he was a force of personality that predated the war itself. Born into a lineage obsessed with military glory, he had spent his entire life preparing for combat, studying ancient battles, polishing cavalry sabers long after they were obsolete, and cultivating an image of ruthless dominance. By 1943, that image had become a real power. In North Africa, it was Patton who restored order after the American humiliation at Kasserine Pass. He imposed discipline with iron certainty, helmets strapped, weapons cleaned, officers accountable. The troops feared him, but they moved, and they won. In Sicily, Patton commanded the U.S. 7th Army. Officially, his mission was secondary, protect Montgomery's flank while the British 8th Army drove toward Messina. Unofficially, Patton turned the campaign into a personal contest. He drove west, seized Palermo, then raced east along the northern coast, capturing Messina hours before the British arrived. He won the race, he won the headlines, he won the argument that aggression, not caution, would end the war faster. Eisenhower knew all of this. He also knew Patton's flaws. The man spoke recklessly. He insulted allies. He treated war as a test of masculine will. He believed fear was weakness, and weakness deserved contempt. The soldiers Patton struck were not cowards. They were suffering from what the war had not yet learned how to name properly: shell shock, combat fatigue, men whose bodies were intact but whose nerves had been shredded by weeks of bombardment. Medical officers protested. Nurses were horrified. Word spread quietly through the ranks. Patton, sensing danger, ordered silence. No reports, no witnesses, no scandal. But wars do not keep secrets forever. By mid-August,
Eisenhower received not only the official account, but also private warnings. Senior officers cautioned him that if this became public, Congress would explode, the press would follow, families would demand answers. The Army's claim to moral authority, already fragile, would crack. Winston Churchill, briefed discreetly, was furious, not at Patton's behavior, but at the possibility of losing him. Britain needed American aggression. Montgomery's caution had its limits. George Marshall in Washington was colder. Results mattered, yes, but discipline mattered more. An army that allowed its generals to assault its wounded could not claim to fight for civilization. Eisenhower stood between these pressures, carrying a burden none of them shared. He was not just winning battles, he was holding together an alliance of egos, British and American, cautious and reckless, political and military. And at the center of it all was Patton, waiting, unaware that the very qualities that made him indispensable had finally made him dangerous. The war demanded unity. Patton demanded dominance. Only one could survive.
August 1943. Allied headquarters remained outwardly calm, but beneath the routines of briefings and communiques, a single question consumed Eisenhower: how to stop a general without breaking an army. The first decision was silence. Eisenhower ordered the incident contained. No public reprimand, no immediate removal. The war in Italy was imminent, and disruption at the top could prove catastrophic. But containment was not forgiveness, it was preparation. Eisenhower summoned Patton. The meeting was private. No aides, no witnesses, only two men who understood power, one who wielded it by force of personality, the other by necessity of command. Patton entered confidently, almost defiantly. He expected rebuke. He did not expect judgment. Eisenhower spoke slowly, deliberately. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He laid out the facts as they were reported, without embellishment, without mercy. 2 soldiers, 2 hospitals, 2 assaults. Then he spoke the words that mattered. Patton's conduct, Eisenhower said, was inexcusable. Not unfortunate, not excessive, inexcusable. He reminded Patton that the soldiers he struck were wounded in service of orders Patton himself had given, that an army could demand courage, but it could not punish collapse under strain with fists. Patton attempted justification. He spoke of discipline, of fear spreading like a disease, of men who broke others by breaking themselves. Eisenhower cut him off. "This is not your army," he said, in effect, if not in those exact words. "It belongs to the nation." The ultimatum followed. Patton would apologize personally to every soldier involved. He would apologize to the medical staff. He would issue a statement to his entire command affirming that battle exhaustion was a legitimate wound of war, and he would accept removal from any future command if Eisenhower deemed it necessary. There was no appeal, no negotiation. Patton listened in silence. For a man whose identity was built on dominance, the humiliation was total. He wept openly, not from remorse alone, but from the realization that his career now rested entirely in another man's hands. He complied. Over the following weeks, Patton walked hospital wards, stiff-backed, voice-controlled, apologizing to soldiers who would never forget the blows or the moment the Army chose to acknowledge their suffering. The words were correct, the tone was forced, the damage lingered. Eisenhower did not publicly destroy Patton, but he did something more consequential. He made it clear that no victory, none, placed a commander above the institution he served. The line had been drawn.
The punishment did not end with apologies. In November 1943, as Allied forces prepared for the greatest invasion in history, Patton was quietly sidelined. No announcement was made, no explanation offered. The newspapers spoke of his brilliance in Sicily, then moved on. Inside the command structure, the message was unmistakable. George Patton would not lead the invasion of Normandy. For a man who measured worth by action, this was the true sentence. While others planned Operation Overlord, Patton was assigned to an illusion. He was placed in command of the fictitious 1st U.S. Army Group, a force that existed only on paper and in German intelligence reports. Inflatable tanks, wooden aircraft, radio traffic scripted for deception. Patton became the face of a lie designed to convince Adolf Hitler that the invasion would strike at Calais, not Normandy. He played the role perfectly. He had no choice. Privately, Patton raged. In letters to his wife, he spoke of betrayal without naming it. He wrote of being put on ice, of knowing the war would be decided without him. He understood what Eisenhower had done. The commander had not dismissed him outright. That would have fractured morale and enraged Washington. Instead, Eisenhower had neutralized him, preserving his usefulness while denying him glory. Eisenhower absorbed criticism from all sides. Churchill questioned the wisdom of sidelining a weapon so sharp. Some American officers whispered that Eisenhower lacked the killer instinct Patton possessed. Others believed he had acted too gently, that Patton should have been court-martialed, not managed. Eisenhower accepted the burden without defense. He understood something the others did not. Wars were not won by individual brilliance alone. They were won by cohesion, by trust between leaders and led. Normandy would require tens of thousands of men to step into gunfire on faith alone. That faith could not survive the knowledge that their pain might be answered with contempt. When D-Day came on June 6, 1944, Patton was not there. He listened to reports from afar as Allied troops fought ashore. He had been contained, controlled, restrained by the very system he had always believed himself superior to. Only later, when the beachhead was secure, would Eisenhower release him again, into France, into battle, into motion. But the terms had changed. Patton would fight. He would win, but never again on his own terms. Authority had spoken, and it had not blinked.
The consequences of Eisenhower's decision did not announce themselves with ceremony. They revealed themselves over time, in quieter but deeper ways. Patton returned to command in August 1944, leading the Third Army across France with astonishing speed. His advance shattered German lines, liberated cities, and relieved pressure on Normandy. The results were undeniable. So was the restraint imposed upon him. He no longer spoke freely to the press. His public statements were monitored. His movements, once unchecked, were now bounded by oversight. Patton had been spared, but never absolved. Within the ranks, the episode changed something fundamental. Soldiers understood that victory did not excuse abuse, that a general, no matter how celebrated, could be forced to bend. Medical officers gained authority. Combat fatigue gained legitimacy. The Army, slowly and imperfectly, acknowledged that modern war broke minds as efficiently as bodies. Eisenhower emerged altered as well. He had proven that supreme command was not about brilliance in battle, but endurance under pressure. He had resisted Churchill's impatience, Marshall's expectations, public opinion, and his own reliance on Patton's aggression. He had chosen unity over spectacle, control over chaos, institution over individual. That choice would define his leadership for the remainder of the war and later his presidency. Patton never forgave the humiliation. He obeyed, he performed, he excelled, but the wound remained. In private moments, he returned again and again to Sicily, to the day when his instincts had overruled his judgment and cost him everything he valued most, unchallenged command.
History often remembers Patton as the warrior and Eisenhower as the administrator. The truth is more precise and more severe. Patton knew how to win battles. Eisenhower knew how to win wars. And in August 1943, when one man went too far, the other proved that leadership was not the absence of power, but the discipline to use it and to restrain it, when restraint was the only victory that mattered.